Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Seric Show Playoff Breakdown. I think that's what we're going to be calling this series. Eric,
Yes.
which series do we have next?
Well, as you could probably tell by the thumbnail and the title of this video, we will be talking about the series between the Chicago Blackhawks and the Edmonton Oilers.
Yes.
Very interesting matchup with the dynasty that might be on their last leg. Some might say with Taves and Kane versus another dynamic duo on the rise with McDavid and Draisaitl, which Edmonton fans are hoping is just the opening to a whole new dynasty for a franchise that knows what it's like to have a team with repeated success in the playoffs. And Chicago is one that's done it recently. So this is a very interesting matchup. And we're going to start by looking at the Chicago Blackhawks, the old wily veteran team that has gotten a lot younger in recent years.
I agree.
Looking up front, they have a lot of younger forwards surrounding Taves and Kane. Spencer, who do you see as real difference makers up front for Chicago?
So obviously we have the classic Taves-Kane dynamic duo of years past, who actually have been performing amazingly this season and have led the Blackhawks to the position they're in. I think that someone who could really spark this playoffs is Kirby Dach. I think his size and his skill could really play a factor in being that third line center, or even moved up potentially if Strome doesn't play to the to the level that Chicago want him to.
Mm-hmm.
Kirby Dach, I think, has a very high level skill, especially with his height. And Strome and Dach are very similar in their sizes, but I think Kirby Dach throws his body around a bit more, and I think that he could really be a breakout player for Chicago if there were to be one out of their lower scoring depth players. But obviously, Taves, Kane, DeBrincat, and Saad are their main guys, and I think you can expect them to put up points. I don't think there's going to be... We'll get to the defense later, but I don't think there's going to be very much more offense coming from the defense. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, Kirby Dach is a great choice for who could really swing the momentum in this series and determine who's going to come away the victor, because Coach Jeremy Colleton has made it clear that Kirby Dach is his anticipated matchup for Leon Draisaitl, which, talk about just being thrown right into the flames, and, we'll see if he sinks or swims. But he's come back to camp, with an extra 4 months to mature, and he knows what it's like to be in the NHL. So they're really hoping he has, he's able to take the next step in his progression and, use his size and speed to help shut down Draisaitl. And on his wing as well is Dominic Kubalik, who sort of had an under the radar season, but he's a Calder Trophy nominee, along with Quinn Hughes and
scored that amazing out of the air goal against the Leafs.
Mm-hmm. And he quietly had picked up a 30-goal season. And so he's been moved down to accommodate this new line that Colleton has tried out in training camp. There's lots of success with Dylan Strome between Patrick Kane and Alex Nylander. Now that line is going to be all offense all the time. They're not, none of those players are known for the defensive abilities, but I think they're just trying to lean into their strengths and just try to outscore the Oilers when that line's on the ice, and hoping that the rest of the team can kind of hold them steady defensively. But I think if Alex Nylander, who's sort of shown some inconsistencies throughout his career, but he has a very high skill level and lots of talent, this is a great opportunity for him playing in the top six. He's not a player that I think could play in on the third or fourth line and really be effective. So he's having time, and Patrick Kane has said that he enjoys playing with Alex Nylander. So this is a huge opportunity for him.
Yeah, definitely. One thing I think that's very interesting about this series as well is the similarities for these two teams, both very offensive-oriented teams with little to no attention to defense necessarily. I mean, Keith has really took a step back, so is Seabrook, who isn't even in the lineup, notably. But yeah, I think Edmonton has the same problem on their D. They're not the strongest. They might have the advantage in this series due to players like Bear, but we'll get to them later, and like Nurse and stuff like that. But I think that they're both going to be trying to outscore each other, and they're both just going to be, it's going to be goal after goal after goal. If I was a betting man, I would bet for a high scoring series. And who knows if Corey Crawford's actually going to be playing, which is another big factor for Chicago, which is something we'll get to later.
Yeah. So I think you hit it right on the head. It's going to be tough for Chicago to kind of keep the puck out of their net. Adam Boqvist, young player, very very highly skilled, but he's been thrust into top pairing minutes with Duncan Keith, and he's going to be hard matched up with Connor McDavid. Big question for Chicago is he going to be able to take on those top minutes against the best player in the world, which is something that not many defensemen can do. Kind of thrown into the fire there. And, I think the Chicago defense is definitely their weak point. And, they'll be looking to be exploited. Brent Seabrook, he actually, over the course of a couple months, he had 3 major surgeries. I believe it was one shoulder and both of his hips. He's miraculously skating, but it looks like he's going to be an extra for now, and they're just hoping that he's skating to continue his career next year. But if injuries pile up, he might, get thrown into it, and we're rooting the best for him because he seems like a great guy. But I think if anything, they might need him to, really turn it on and step in here.
Yeah, I was laughing a little bit just because it just seems like this guy just has so much going for him, but so much not going for him at the same time. I mean, he's so successful in his hockey career, but it seems like he made a deal with the devil that caused him to have all the success just to have all these injuries later in his career so he could have a very painful end of his career. It seems like he did that. But
still making a lot of money though.
100%. That's the thing though.
Money.
I think he'll be happy at the end of the day with his multiple cup rings and the millions of dollars he's made to ensure the security of his family financially for the foreseeable future. But I think that you always want to see good players that you grew up watching do well and be okay at least. If you are at least a decent person, and I think that we both are, and I think that Seabrook, should get a chance to play to prove himself, and if he can't play anymore, then maybe it's time to move on. That's just the way it goes.
Yeah, and I think, with time to move on, you can see, a lot of young players getting more prominent roles in Chicago, and they would be the first ones to admit that they probably didn't foresee themselves in a playoff position, which led to them making a couple trades such as Eric Gustafson and Robin Lehner, who played great for them at goalie. They got, I think, a draft pick and a prospect back in the trade. But here they are heading into the playoff round, and Corey Crawford has been deemed unfit to play. Now, we don't know exactly what that means, whether it's a positive test or just an injury that he's battling, but we know that he's not on the ice right now with about a week before exhibition play. So even if he gets back and he's with the team, how is he going to look? And, how important are those reps and, actually, game time simulations and stuff for a goalie, Spencer? I don't know if you can kind of weigh in on practice versus games and how different they are.
I think it's everything. I mean, you can stop 100,000 stops in practice and then let every goal in a game. There are completely different mindsets you have to be in. There's different, the feeling is completely different. You feel more nervous on a game day, so you're going to make extra movements that you didn't think you were going to make. You're going to overthink things just because you're trying to stay on top of everything. There's a whole different mindset because all these players are such great competitors, and that's why they're amazing athletes, is because of their competitive nature that got them there. And that competitive atmosphere cannot be replicated in practice, no matter how much you try. And even if without the fans being there, I think the feeling on the ice is what's really going to make the difference between the ears of a goaltender. And if they're nervous, they're gonna show it. And if they're rusty, they're gonna show that. And the most important thing as a goalie is, if you give up a goal, it's to wipe it out of your memory as if it never happened, but to learn from what you did wrong, which is the hardest part. And especially coming back in right away and being expected to do what Corey Crawford might be expected to do is a lot of pressure and can cause a lot of stress. So it could potentially ruin Corey Crawford that way as well. So
if there's still a possibility that Crawford isn't able to return at all, what are your thoughts on Malcolm Subban? I think when I first heard about Corey Crawford, I thought of Colin Delia, who would be the next one called up. Yeah. But I forgot that in the Robin Lehner trade, Malcolm Subban came back the other way and was backing him up. And I think he's the presumed. I think there's still Delia's still in the mix, but in my opinion, I think Subban would probably be the next one up. What do you think about his potential as a goalie going forward, and how he would kind of deal with facing the Oilers right now?
I actually disagree with that entirely. I think that the Blackhawks, knowing who Delia is as a goaltender, him being a backup to Crawford longer than Malcolm himself, and knowing the team's play and style more than Malcolm has, I think that, and their skill level not even being that different, I don't think Malcolm Subban is very much better than Connor Delia, and I don't think Connor Delia is very much better than Malcolm Subban. I think you could throw either one in and have the same result. Malcolm Subban has had more time in the NHL, of course, but I think Connor Delia has proven himself in the AHL to be a solid goaltender and even a solid backup goaltender at some points for the Blackhawks. I think it's hard to judge Blackhawks goalies right now because of their lack of defense and the amount of attempts they give up per game, but that's why Corey Crawford's been such a big deal for the Blackhawks this season, is because he's made so many stops and done so well for them. So I think that in terms of your question, where do you think Malcolm Subban's going to go? I don't see him being very much more than a backup for a very good team that needs cheap backup goaltending. I think Malcolm Subban can put in starts and put in games where he's very impressive, but I don't think he's the most consistent goalie. I think he has trouble staying consistent, like he has shown in his career with the Bruins system through Providence, and even in Vegas, he played that one game against Toronto, which was pretty decent. He played very well, but it's just the inconsistency is why I think they go with Connor Delia, who I think they feel more comfortable in terms of organizationally.
I just want Colin, not Connor.
Colin, sorry. Colin.
Delia. Yeah, just so everyone's clear.
I knew it was Colin. I knew it. I said Connor, but I knew it was Colin.
There we go. Yeah, I there is something to be said with the organization knowing that, but I'm of the opinion that I don't think that Delia has shown it at the NHL level and been able to play. Over a larger period of time, those Subban stats have been better than Delia, and
barely.
Okay, I think Subban would be the next one up, and he seems like he's the goalie with the higher potential than Delia. Delia to me doesn't seem like more than a backup option, and I don't think that's who you want heading into the series. I think you want someone with the potential to be a starter, even if they're a little less consistent, because as we're going to go into this Oilers team, you're going to need your goalie to be a difference maker and not just merely there. You're going to need someone who's going to move the needle for you. And this Oilers team, they actually also have a little bit of a goalie situation. who do you think is going to start for the Edmonton Oilers?
That's a very good question. I mean, you look at Koskinen and Mike Smith, and you think that because of the price tag Koskinen have, he'd be the starter. But you also look at Mike Smith, and he also has a very big price tag on him as well. But anyways, I think that Mike Smith might start this due to his past experience in the playoffs. I mean, did Koskinen start games for Edmonton in the playoffs at all, or no?
No, because Edmonton hasn't been in the playoffs since I believe 2017.
Yeah, so he would have been there. Yeah, so and Mike Smith's had more playoff experience, and I think he's played better this season. I mean,
no. Koskinen has played significantly better this season by really? A lot of metrics. Koskinen actually had a pretty underrated season, and by the advanced goalie stats, he significantly outplayed, like goals saved above average and stuff like that. So he had a really good season. But I do think it comes down to what you said, the playoff experience.
The veteran Mike Smith.
And Mike Smith, and it's important to note that Oilers coach Dave Tippett has coached Smith on 3 separate teams throughout his career. Over half of Smith's career has been playing for Tippett, first in Dallas, then in Phoenix or Arizona, and now with the Oilers. So there's a lot of familiarity there, including a huge playoff run for the Coyotes back in 2012. So I agree. I think that Smith will probably get the start, but I don't think he should personally. I mean, Koskinen this season in 38 games had a .917 save percentage, and seemed to kind of settle down into the NHL. Not that the contract looks great in hindsight, but he did outplay Smith, and I think there is something to be said that this is such a strange playoff situation as is. I think you just play your better player. If I'm the coach, which of course I'm not, and I don't think any NHL teams are going to be hiring me anytime soon, but that's just my opinion here.
I definitely agree. I think that Edmonton has the goaltending advantage in this series by a long shot if Corey Crawford is unfit to play by the first game.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyways, going into the offense for the Edmonton Oilers, who do you think is going to be a massive factor here?
Well, I think it's...
Other than the obvious.
Well, it's obvious to look at McDavid and Draisaitl, and, that is what this team is. But I think when you're looking at, what player will really, determine the potential, it's the players that play with them. And, the Oilers have struggled to find a winger to play with McDavid. And so early in training camp, they move Ryan Nugent-Hopkins up from Draisaitl's line to play with McDavid on that left side, and really create another option and skilled player for McDavid to play with. And if they can find chemistry, I think that's bad news, not just for Chicago, but for the rest of the teams in the Western Conference, having to deal with a McDavid line that's going, and Draisaitl playing with Kailer Yamamoto, who was amazing after being recalled from the AHL mid-season. Yeah. And they found great chemistry together.
Yeah, not to mention Kassian on that first line, protecting McDavid and throwing his body around when necessary. He kind of reminds me of like what Colton Orr did against Zdeno Chara in that 2013 playoff series, where he just ran into him and just made sure that he was the sole focus of all the bigger players that McDavid could potentially have trouble with. And making room for McDavid on the ice. I think that Kassian can do that. And Kassian has a scoring touch, too. People forget that he can put some goals in. He did that this season. He's not expected to, but he can if put in the right positions. And when you're on McDavid's line, I'm pretty sure that's the best position Kassian could be in to have a goal at all. So.
Yeah, no, he was a key playoff performer for them back in 2017 with his physical play. He did go through some goal slumps this season, but and they're hoping that adding just another offensive element to that line will kind of take the onus off of Kassian, because when he was playing in the past, it seemed like he was the second best offensive player on the first line, which is not the situation for him. I think being that the third option kind of the backup plan is we'll take a little bit less focus on him and allow him to keep scoring. I think the Oilers, they made some smart moves heading in to the playoffs after the trade deadline. Before the world turned upside down, they decided to make a couple, low risk moves, getting Tyler Ennis and Andreas Athanasiou to kind of shore up their play a little bit, which I think is important because, as much as we talked about how amazing the Oilers are, out of all the 24 teams still remaining, they were the worst at 5-on-5 play. They were the worst. Their expected goals percentage was 47 point something percent. So they were not driving play at 5-on-5. They just had one of the best power plays in recent history, and they had the second ranked penalty kill behind the San Jose Sharks. So the best penalty kill still remaining in the playoffs. They relied solely on special teams. So having Ennis and Athanasiou to maybe, help provide a little bit of a spark and some forward depth is important because, if they're not getting power play opportunities, which usually are a bit more rare in playoff situations, I think this is going to be a big focus for Chicago, is not taking penalties and keep them at 5-on-5. But Edmonton is obviously hoping that, moving Nugent Hopkins up and their additions up front can kind of help balance their 5-on-5 play, because it's not like Chicago was stellar at 5-on-5 either, but Edmonton, that was an area where they really struggled this year.
Yeah, I think Tyler Ennis is an underrated player, especially being from Toronto. Watching him in Toronto, he's very skilled. He's got great hands. Underrated. He can put himself in scoring positions, and that's what you want. He's pretty quick for his age, and he's shown flashes of vintage Tyler Ennis over the past 2 seasons, and I think if he can perform with Draisaitl as his center, I think that's the best thing that Edmonton can hope for. And Athanasiou, I call him Athanasiou later because of how fast he is, and I think that Edmonton's been looking for a winger for a long time with a lot of speed to add. Like Yamamoto is one of those players that they brought up from their own system, but trading for a player with speed has been something of an issue for Edmonton until they've gotten players like Ennis and Athanasiou. So I think that those two players, like you said, could have big factors in how Edmonton does.
Yeah, and it's just important to note quickly that we have Tyler Ennis listed on the second line, Athanasiou on the third. They've been swapping back and forth throughout training camp, so it's very well likely that Athanasiou could be playing with Draisaitl and Ennis on that third line with Riley Shan. So that's still, it's sort of a fluid situation with the left wingers.
Yep. Either way.
But I think it's more set in stone on defense for Edmonton. I don't think there's that much to really say about the Oilers' defense, because to me it seems sort of not flashy but solid. But there's not really many standouts. Ethan Bear was a great revelation for them this year, and I think it just sort of solidified what is, it's a decent defensive core. It's not going to blow anyone away, but it shouldn't lose the series for them.
No. It won't, as you said, it won't be the thing that will be their downfall. Mm-hmm. If anything, it will be their lack of scoring if they find a drought there, or goaltending. Mm-hmm. But even then, with Draisaitl and McDavid, I think that's hard to expect a goal drought from any in the top 6 area. So I think that if Edmonton is to lose this, it's going to be because their goaltending just does not do what it needs to do.
Mm-hmm. Now, with all that being said, who do you see coming out on top of this best of 5, Chicago or Edmonton?
Surprisingly, I see Chicago coming out on top. I see Kane and Taves putting on what they think could be one of their final shots at a Stanley Cup. In a shorter series, I think that anything can happen, and if Taves and Kane go on a roll like they did this season and continue their form, I think that, and all that extra scoring like Nylander, DeBrincat, Strome, and Doc and Kublik and all these guys, all that just keep going. Mm-hmm. I think that they have a chance of beating this Edmonton Oilers team.
Yeah, that's there definitely is something to be said about having a voice like Jonathan Toews. Talking about how important it is and how rare these truly good teams are, and what it's like to be able to make a run to the cup. I think in my mind, we kind of talked about him, but we haven't really. The best player in the world right now is Connor McDavid, and
Yeah.
Connor McDavid is a player that's going to he's going to continue to get better because he's still young, and he was able to rest, which I think is so important because all last summer he was rehabbing his knee injury, refusing to forgo. He was
in the pool.
Yeah, he didn't undergo surgery. He just fought through it, rehabbing, and he was able to actually rest, take some time off, come back refreshed. And I don't see a way that the Chicago defense can stop him. Not to mention Leon Draisaitl. So for me, without knowing exactly how their trade deadline acquisitions kind of look in their lineup and what the team feels like, I think Edmonton is going to be able to take this with the better stars with McDavid and Draisaitl right now, a better defensive core, and just a more, in my mind, secure goaltending position because we don't really know what's happening in Chicago. So I would say Edmonton.